Sittings the amendment be agreed to. I call the member for Denison.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, as I'm sure you're aware, I've long been a strong advocate for marriage equality. And I think it's just that, a matter of equality. And I do find that the current situation where the Marriage Act explicitly demands that marriage can only be between a man and a woman is legislated discrimination. We have indeed come a very long way to deal with legislated discrimination in this country, but the Marriage Act still stands out as a glaring example and one that this parliament could fix and fix very quickly. Deputy Speaker, I'm sure you'd also be aware I've long been very critical of a plebiscite, and in particular the way this plebiscite has been proposed as a non-binding an opinion poll. I think it is the case that a plebiscite would be a very divisive moment in our nation's history, and it will be very costly. I've heard figures up to $200 million. I would have only supported a plebiscite if it had genuinely been the only pathway to marriage equality. But of course we have another pathway available to us right now, and that is a parliamentary vote. So long as we have that other pathway to marriage equality, then that's where I will put my support. Now, Deputy Speaker, I am respectful of those people that would disagree with me. There are many Australians who do not want the Marriage Act changed. Many Australians who passionately believe, heartfelt believe, that marriage must remain something only between a man and a woman. I respect that, and I respect what they've got to say, but I disagree with them. I disagree with the opponents of marriage equality in a number of ways. It's simply not the case that a public debate would be respectful. Unfortunately, there are what I'll characterise as people with perhaps overly strong, even extreme views on both sides of the argument, who would cross the line and act or say things which would be improper. Now, because I'm a strong advocate for marriage equality, I suppose that's why I'm on the receiving end of some of that commentary from people who oppose marriage equality. And there's been a lot of correspondence to my office, Deputy Speaker, a lot of emails, letters, phone calls from people who would say things like homosexuals are deviants, say things like bringing in marriage equality would be a slippery slope, would put us on a slippery slope to bestiality, and all sorts of other bizarre arguments are made. So it's just simply not the case that we could have any confidence that a public debate would be respectful. And it's simply not the case, Deputy Speaker, that marriage has always been between a man and a woman. We seem to have forgotten in this debate that the Marriage Act was only changed as recently as 2004 during the period of Prime Minister John Howard. So in other words, up until 2004, the Federal Marriage Act did not explicitly require that marriage be between a man and a woman. So to say that the Marriage Act has always been the way it is just not right. It's just incorrect. Because in 2004, not with a plebiscite, but with a simple bill through this place, the Marriage Act was changed. It's simply not the case, Deputy Speaker, that we are like Ireland, and like Ireland, it needs to be decided by the people. Because the fact is that because of Ireland's constitutional framework, the only pathway, genuinely the only pathway to marriage equality was indeed a popular vote by the people. But in our case, it is not something that's addressed by the Constitution. It's something which is only covered in the Marriage Act, which is the work of this parliament to make such an act, to amend that act as it did in 2004, and to amend it again as it might do in 2016. Deputy Speaker, it's simply not the case that to not have a plebiscite would be undemocratic. While I respect the argument that's made by people who say that, I disagree with them. I think they're wrong. The fact is, we are a representative democracy, not a participatory democracy. In other words, it's our job, when we're elected, it's our job to come into this place and to represent our community. That's the way our democratic system works in this country. It is simply not a part of our system that we would routinely, or very often at all, go to back to the public to find out what they think, because they've already told us what they think by electing us to come to Canberra and to represent them. We don't have a plebiscite before we declare war. We didn't have a plebiscite in 2004 to change the Marriage Act. It's a very, very rare thing, and that's because it's simply not part of our democratic system. We are, as I say, a representative democracy, and we are not a participatory democracy. Deputy Speaker, it's just not the case. It is not the case that the government must do nothing if it can't deliver on its election promise of a plebiscite. The fact is, political parties, candidates, we make all sorts of promises before an election, hopefully in good faith. I certainly do. And there is no doubt that the members of the Liberal and National parties promised in good faith that there would be a plebiscite. But if you can't deliver on an election promise for a legitimate reason, then it's our job to find another pathway. For example, with superannuation reform, the members of the Liberal and National parties, in good faith, went to the election and promised there would be a particular set of changes to superannuation in this country. But the parliament formed, the numbers were clear, both within the government and between the government, the opposition and the crossbench, and it was clear that that reform could not be delivered as promised, so another pathway was chosen. So too in this case. The government made that promise in good faith, but it won't be able to deliver on that promise, it seems, so it needs to find another pathway. Politics is about the art of the possible. It's not about running into a roadblock and stopping dead in your tracks. It's finding a way around the roadblock, finding another pathway. And of course, a vote in this place this year is that obvious other pathway. Deputy Speaker, it's simply not the case that this matter is about children. And I've noticed the opponents of marriage equality more and more are bringing the debate, or their part of the debate, back to children. And they are creating this impression that if we have marriage equality, then gays and lesbians will start caring for children, having children, caring for children, and that will be bad for children. But what that whole line of argument completely and utterly misses, that in this country currently there are thousands upon thousands of children being brought up in same-sex families. Indeed, when I look at the 2011 census figures, there were 6,300 children in same-sex couples. That was 5 years ago. Now, interestingly, that figure in 2011 was much greater than the census before that. And we can, I think, quite reasonably make the assumption or the judgment that the figure is growing strongly and that this year's census will show an even much greater figure. And when you consider that this is one of those sorts of things which would tend to be underreported, I would go so far as to say that the number of children in this country now who are in same-sex couples is multiples of that 6,300 that were identified 5 years ago. So in other words, regardless of whether or not we change the Marriage Act, there are already many thousands of children in same-sex couples, and there will continue to be many thousands of children in same-sex couples. So the debate about the plebiscite, the debate about whether or not to change the Marriage Act, has nothing to do with children. Nothing at all. And I refute in the strongest possible terms, Deputy Speaker, this argument that is sometimes made that gays and lesbians are bad parents or would be bad parents. That is just simply not the case. In fact, gays and lesbians often, unless they sort of come by children through previous relationships, if a gay or lesbian couple want to have a child, it's obviously not something that can happen by accident. It's something that they have to put a large amount of thought to and a lot of effort to make it happen. In my experience, Deputy Speaker, gays and lesbians generally make very good parents. And in fact, when I think about a woman I know, who I would even go so far as to say is the best mother I know, she is in a lesbian relationship. So it's not about whether children are in a heterosexual family or a same-sex family. It's about whether or not they're in a loving family and whether or not all their needs are being met. That's what matters. In fact, you have many excellent heterosexual parents and some dreadful heterosexual parents. And we have many wonderful gay and lesbian parents and some dreadful gay and lesbian parents. It's not about heterosexual, gay or lesbian. It's about whether they're good parents, whether they love their children, whether they create a loving environment for their children, whether all of the needs of their children are met. That's what matters. And I'd go further and say it doesn't even have to be a couple. There are some wonderful single mums out there who are doing a great job. There are some dreadful single mums out there doing a terrible job. There are some wonderful single dads out there doing a great job. And there's some dreadful single dads out there doing a lousy job. It's not about the relationship. It's about whether or not those heterosexual parents or those gay parents or those lesbian parents or those single parents, it's about whether or not they love their children. That's the only thing that matters. And I make the point again, Deputy Speaker, there are already gay and lesbian parents. There will continue to be gay and lesbian parents. It's got nothing to do whether the Marriage Act is changed. And if I could just talk raw politics for a moment, Deputy Speaker, the pathway that I keep referring back to is obviously one of the private members' bills that is before the House. The Labor Party, to their credit, and I don't think it's politics by the Labor Party, I think it is well-intentioned. There's a Labor Party private members' bill. There's a crossbench private members' bill. For the life of me, when this plebiscite is dead and buried, for the life of me I will not understand why at least a few government members wouldn't cross the floor and support that crossbench private members' bill to suspend standing orders, to bring that bill on for a debate, to put the question and decide the matter this year. Now, sure, while the party is still pursuing a plebiscite, let them continue to pursue the plebiscite. I don't begrudge them that. But when the plebiscite is dead and buried and there is only one pathway open to them, I'd suggest to the honourable members from the government that at least a few of you should do the right thing and support the bill and bring it on. If you're in this place for policy outcomes, if you're in this place in the pursuit of the public interest, then that's what you'll do. But if you're in this place just because you're another party hack who got elected because you're a party hack and comes in here and is happy to take the gold coin, but at the end of the day only cares about your self-interest or your political party's interest, well then so be it. But you're letting the public interest down. But I don't think that'll be the case. I think there's enough good men and women, people of good heart in the government, who will see the sense when the plebiscite is over, or when the matter of the plebiscite is finished. They'll see the sense in supporting us on the crossbench and dealing with the matter. And of course, some people say that if they do that, that'll bring about the destruction of the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. It will not bring about the destruction of the Prime Minister. In fact, it could be the saviour of the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister, to his credit, is sticking to his election promise. I don't agree with it, but to his credit, the Prime Minister is sticking with his election promise. And when he can't deliver on his election promise, if a few of his party cross the floor and help us bring on a private members' bill, then he will have been true to his word, will get the reform in the public interest, and then the matter will be finished and we can all move on. It may well be the saviour of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. It's at least the least bad course of action that he might confront. Deputy Speaker, thanks for letting me have my say. I will obviously not support this plebiscite. I'll continue to prosecute the case for for a vote in this parliament, and I'll continue to lobby members of the government to support the Labor bill, or perhaps more likely the cross-bench private members bill. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.